One battle, one calculated betrayal, one technology carried into captivity. In the year 751, the Tang dynasty, the mightiest empire of the East, stepped beyond the Pamir Mountains and never returned. The Abbasid Caliphate seized the heart of Asia. The Silk Road changed masters. And Chinese craftsmen in captivity gifted the Islamic world with paper. The Battle of Talas, the day China lost the West, and the world entered a new era. To understand how this catastrophe unfolded, we must first grasp what brought these two titans to the edge of the world in the first place. By the mid-8th century, the Tang dynasty had reached the zenith of its power. For over a century, Chinese emperors had projected force across an empire stretching from the Pacific coast to the oasis cities of Central Asia. Their armies had crushed Korean kingdoms, subdued Tibetan uprisings, and established a network of protectorates that made the Silk Road a Chinese thoroughfare. Every caravan moving through Kashgar, Samarkand, or Fergana paid tribute to Tang officials. Every local ruler from the Tarim Basin to the shores of the Aral Sea acknowledged Chinese supremacy, at least nominally. This was not merely territorial expansion. It was economic dominance. The Silk Road represented the lifeblood of Eurasian commerce, channeling silk, porcelain, and tea westward, while gold, horses, and precious stones flowed east. Whoever controlled these routes controlled wealth on a continental scale, and for generations, that power belonged to China. But in 747, a revolution convulsed the Islamic world. The Abbasid family, descended from the Prophet's uncle, orchestrated a brutal overthrow of the Umayyad dynasty that had ruled from Damascus for nearly a century. The Abbasids did not simply seize power, they annihilated their predecessors. Umayyad corpses were exhumed and desecrated. Living relatives were hunted across 3 continents and put to the sword. Only one prince escaped the purge, fleeing to the far western edge of the Muslim world in Iberia. The new caliphate relocated its capital eastward to Baghdad, closer to the Persian heartland, closer to the wealth of Central Asia, and ominously closer to the Chinese sphere of influence. The Abbasids brought with them an army hardened by revolutionary warfare and a burning desire to prove their legitimacy through conquest. Central Asia, that vast expanse of steppes, mountains, and oasis cities, suddenly found itself caught between 2 expanding empires. Local rulers faced an impossible choice: remain loyal to the distant Tang court or align with the ascending Abbasid power. Most hedged their bets, sending tribute to both sides and hoping to avoid becoming a battlefield. One king, however, made a fatal miscalculation. The ruler of Fergana, a prosperous valley kingdom in what is now Uzbekistan, observed the Abbasid rise and decided the future lay with the new caliphate. He ceased sending tribute to China and began negotiations with Arab emissaries. When Tang officials arrived to demand an explanation, he had them executed. This was not merely an insult, it was a direct challenge to Chinese authority. If the Tang court allowed a minor vassal to murder imperial envoys with impunity, every kingdom from Korea to Persia would question whether Chinese power was real or merely reputation. The response had to be overwhelming. Emperor Xuanzong dispatched General Gao Shanji, a battle-tested commander of Korean descent who had spent his career pacifying the western frontiers. His orders were unambiguous: march to Fergana, crush the rebellion, and remind Central Asia that defiance of the Tang dynasty carried consequences measured in ashes and corpses. Gao assembled a formidable expeditionary force, 30,000 professional soldiers, including elite cavalry units, siege engineers, and auxiliary troops from allied tribes. Among these auxiliaries were 20,000 Karluk Turks, nomadic warriors who had fought alongside Chinese armies for years and were considered reliable allies. But the Abbasids were already moving. Caliph al-Safa's general, Ziyad ibn Salih, gathered forces from across the Islamic world, Arab cavalry from the Arabian Peninsula, Persian infantry from Khorasan, and critically, he too courted the Karluk Turks, offering them terms that made Chinese gold look paltry. The two armies converged on the Talas River Valley in the summer of 751. Not a fortress, not a capital, simply a place where geography forced a decision. The mountains narrowed, the roads crossed, and two empires that barely acknowledged each other's existence prepared to settle the question of Central Asian dominance through violence. The stage was set. The armies faced each other across the shallow waters of the Talas, and the future of an entire continent hung in the balance. The Battle of Talas began on a scorching July morning and lasted 5 brutal days. What unfolded was not a clean tactical engagement studied in military academies, but a grinding war of attrition where discipline, endurance, and ultimately treachery determined the outcome. Day 1 saw General Gao Xianji strike first. He understood his strategic vulnerability, outnumbered, far from supply lines, facing an enemy fighting on more familiar terrain. Rather than wait for the Abbasid forces to dictate terms, he launched his heavy cavalry in a devastating frontal assault. Tang horsemen, armored in overlapping iron plates and wielding long lances, crashed into the Arab center with the force of an avalanche. For a moment, Chinese military superiority appeared decisive. The Abbasid lines buckled under the impact. Shields splintered. Men fell back in disarray. The Tang war machine was performing exactly as it had across 100 frontier campaigns, grinding forward with methodical ferocity. But Ziyad ibn Salih was no novice. He had fought in the Abbasid Revolution, had seen worse chaos, and survived. He allowed his center to yield ground, drawing the Chinese cavalry deeper into a controlled retreat. Then he unleashed his flanks. Arab horsemen and Persian infantry swept in from both sides, enveloping the Tang vanguard in a vise of steel and flesh. The Chinese held. Their discipline did not break. They formed defensive formations, locked shields, and waited for darkness. When night fell, both armies withdrew to their camps, tended their wounded, and prepared for the next day's slaughter. Days 2 and 3 followed a similar pattern. Dawn attacks, cavalry charges that churned the riverbank into a mud of blood and dust, arrow volleys that darkened the sky, close combat in the shallows where men hacked at each other with swords and axes until exhaustion or death claimed them. Neither side could gain decisive advantage. The Tang forces could not break through. The Abbasid coalition could not dislodge them. Throughout these engagements, the Karluk Turks remained on the periphery, watching from elevated positions. Their 20,000 cavalry represented the margin between stalemate and victory, for whichever side secured their commitment. Both Gao Xianji and Ziyad ibn Salih sent emissaries with increasingly desperate offers: gold, land, trade privileges, political autonomy. General Gao believed loyalty would prevail. The Karluks had fought beside Tang armies before. They had accepted Chinese silver for years. Surely past alliances counted for something. They did not. On the afternoon of day 4, the Karluks made their choice. Historians still debate their exact motivation. Perhaps the Abbasids offered better terms. Perhaps the Karluk leaders calculated that the rising caliphate represented the future, while the Tang dynasty was overstretched and vulnerable. Perhaps it was simple opportunism, the chance to plunder a weakened ally. Whatever the reason, the Karluks did not simply switch sides. They waited for the precise moment when Gao Xianzhi had committed his reserves to a major push against the Abbasid front lines. They waited until the Chinese army was fully engaged, unable to disengage without inviting catastrophe, and then they attacked from the rear. 20,000 horsemen smashed into the Chinese baggage trains and rear guard. Not enemy warriors, but supposed allies. Men who had camped alongside Tang soldiers the night before now cut them down without mercy. Supply lines collapsed. Communication broke down. Panic spread through the ranks like wildfire. Professional soldiers do not flee at the first sign of trouble. The Tang forces attempted to regroup, to form a defensive perimeter that could fight on two fronts. But armies are organisms of coordination and trust. Once that cohesion fractures, once soldiers realize they are surrounded and betrayed, combat effectiveness disintegrates. The Chinese lines shattered. Units lost contact. Officers fell trying to rally their men. What had been an organized military force became scattered groups of desperate fighters seeking any path to survival. General Gao Xianzhi, recognizing the collapse, fought his way out with a fraction of his army. Perhaps 2,000 men from the original 30,000 escaped the killing field. The rest perished in combat, drowned fleeing across the river, or threw down their weapons in surrender. Day 5 brought silence. The battlefield fell quiet except for the cries of the wounded and the circling of carrion birds. The Abbasid forces controlled the valley. The Tang dynasty's western army had ceased to exist. The immediate military consequences were clear. China had lost not just a battle, but an entire expeditionary force. More critically, they had lost the aura of invincibility that had kept Central Asian kingdoms aligned with Chinese interests. Within months, cities from Kashgar to Samarkand shifted their allegiance to the Caliphate. The Silk Road, that great commercial artery, now flowed through territory controlled by the Islamic world. But the true cost of Talas would not become apparent for years. Among the thousands of Chinese prisoners marched westward to Samarkand and Baghdad were men whose knowledge would inadvertently trigger a revolution in human civilization. The prisoners marching westward carried more than defeat. Among them were craftsmen who knew a secret China had guarded for 6 centuries: papermaking. For generations, China monopolized paper production. The technique, pulping plant fibers into cheap, abundant writing material, gave the Tang dynasty an administrative edge no rival could match. Records, orders, knowledge flowed faster and cheaper than anywhere else on earth. The process was state classified. Exporting it meant execution. But after Talas, secrecy became irrelevant. The Abbasids controlled the papermakers themselves. Faced with torture or offers of freedom, the captives talked. Within a decade, Samarkand had a paper mill. The technology exploded across the Islamic world. Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo. Books multiplied. Libraries expanded exponentially. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became an intellectual superpower, preserving Greek philosophy, developing algebra, advancing medicine and astronomy. The Islamic Golden Age built itself on Chinese paper. Europe would not see papermaking for 400 more years, widening the knowledge gap for centuries. China, meanwhile, never recovered. 4 years after Talas, the Anlushan rebellion nearly erased the Tang dynasty. 52 million people reduced to 17 million in census records. The capital fell. Provinces collapsed. The empire survived as a shell. China abandoned the West permanently. The Pamir Mountains became a psychological wall they would never cross again. Central Asia shifted irreversibly into the Islamic sphere. Mosques replaced Buddhist temples. Arabic replaced Chinese as the language of power. The Silk Road changed ownership. One battle decided it all. The Islamic world gained a continent and the key to an intellectual revolution. China lost its western frontier and its technological monopoly, and prisoners of war, trying simply to survive, accidentally triggered a civilizational transformation. So, what was Talas really? Not just a battle, a hinge in history. The moment the world pivoted and never looked back. China retreated east and never returned. The Tang dynasty pulled back behind the Pamirs and turned inward. Central Asia, controlled for generations, slipped away permanently. The Silk Road shifted ownership. The wealth flowed to Baghdad instead of Chang'an. The Abbasid Caliphate surged forward, Samarkand, Bukhara, Tashkent. The great cities transformed. The cultural landscape changed within a generation, and that change proved permanent. The prisoners who revealed papermaking never knew what they started. They were just trying to survive. But their knowledge became the foundation of an intellectual empire while Europe stumbled through centuries relying on expensive parchment. Today, when you look at Central Asia, you see the aftermath of Talas, the languages, the culture, the religious landscape, the civilizational borders all trace back to 5 days of blood in a remote river valley. Because history does not always announce itself. Sometimes the most important moments happen where nobody is watching. A narrow valley, a calculated betrayal, a secret extracted under duress, and the world shifts on its axis. Talas was not the biggest battle ever fought, not the bloodiest. It lacks the fame of Thermopylae or Waterloo, but it broke an empire, launched a golden age, and drew a line across Asia that endures today. One battle, one river, one betrayal. The day China lost the West and the Islamic world claimed the heart of Asia. Talas, 751. The battle that changed everything. And almost nobody remembers its name.